Get rid of that. And we have just a few housekeeping things before we get started with our presentation today. Please use the chat to introduce yourself, talk to each other. Use the Q&A button to ask topic-specific questions of the speaker. We do have monitors who are monitoring both the chat and the Q&A. If there is any specific questions that's very, very pertinent, we will reach out to the speaker. Otherwise, we'll hold all the questions to the end. Any resources, links to the video recording, and certificates of attendance will be sent within a couple of weeks. At this time, we're not offering continuing education credit, but we will be doing so in the future. So if you could tell us where you're from in the chat box, that would be great. Looks like we've got people from Indiana, Georgia, Baltimore, North Carolina. I think that's Nebraska, Georgia, Alaska. So welcome everyone, and we'll be getting started. So next slide, and Diana, if you'll introduce our speaker, that would be great.
Thank you. Hey everyone, it's my pleasure to introduce Sherry Kirk. I'm murdering her last name. We're just going to say Sherry K. She is the founder of EBNRA Incorporated, DBA Victim Voice, and serves as its Chief Executive Officer. Formerly, she was the managing partner of Holistic Business Solutions, small business and nonprofit consulting firm. As a survivor of child abuse and domestic violence, she has devoted herself to ensuring victims of discrimination, harassment, and abuse are heard, believed, and able to seek legal justice. She resides in central New Jersey with her husband and daughter, as well as many of her adopted furry family members. So it's my great pleasure to go ahead and introduce Sherry.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, my name is Sherry Kurtikal. It's Turkish. I married into that one. So, so good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank you for joining me today. There is a lot at stake for victims when they must document their abuse to prove that what they describe to a person acting in an official capacity is actual and truthful information. So not only do they have to rely on themselves to remember details and save information, but they must rely on professionals like you to carefully document every detail that will show the level of trauma inflicted on them and can stand up in the evidentiary requirements of the court and the unrelenting scrutiny, unfortunately, of the defense. There are many times when you will suspect or know a victim will return to their abuser. It's not that they don't want to leave for good, but often they have few options that they see as realistic to move past this relationship. You may have the opportunity to make a recommendation that they document their experiences. Your recommendation should be as informed as you are in your professional capacity and may make all the difference in how they are able to investigate and navigate the justice systems available to them. So collecting prosecutorial evidence of long-term abuse presents a lot of challenges when the beginning stages include subtle grooming of the victim to create an air of self-doubt, coupled with trauma, preventing a clear recall of specific dates, times, and facts surrounding each incident. We will explain how evidence collection can be mastered to contain and house real-time live incidents that corroborate victim accounts, as well as the potential to bring additional charges for simultaneous crimes such as weapons, animal abuse, etc. Find additional victims and identify potential witnesses. We will also show how to guarantee the integrity of the evidence so the victim is protected from themselves and the evidence meets the Daubert standard of evidence admissibility. So let's get started with the agenda for today. We'll cover the following topics. So by the end of our hour together, you will have a clear understanding of the important role the right technology can play and leave here with resources to ensure you're asking the right questions, have educated yourself on the different options, and can make more informed decisions in technology that you recommend. We'll talk about why. We'll talk about the words that really matter, legal proceedings. We'll talk about the victim's voice tool and how it benefits a victim. And then we'll review the purpose of why we're having this conversation. So domestic violence are behind closed doors crimes that happen gradually, where abusers whittle away at their self-esteem, isolate the victim from friends and family, convince them they don't need to work to render them financially dependent, and often ensure there are kids involved to further solidify the need to stay. There is too often a lack of evidence, and even when proof exists, it must bear proof of burden to meet the strict legal standards of court admissibility. The current reality is that less than 2% of domestic violence abusers in the US are convicted. That to me is just unacceptable. So here are just a few of the obstacles we hear from victims themselves. I'm isolated from my friends and family. Threatens to harm my pets. It's an all-party consent state. I can't record what happens. I have no access to money. Constantly threatens to take my kids away. They believe me. I get blamed. I even get arrested the last time. I think I'm going crazy. I don't do the things I'm blamed for. I know I don't, but I'm not so sure. I can't leave. I have nowhere to go. There are no housing options for me. I'm being spied on all the time. Everything is being watched and monitored. I'm never alone. I can't take this anymore. What does it matter? At least when I'm high, I don't feel it and I don't care. I had to give up my job. I'm not allowed to work. Where would I work to make enough money to pay rent and get a car to go to work? And I can't get anyone to help me because of their influence in this town. These are all actual statements made to us as by individuals this year pre-COVID. So we can only imagine how all of these are now amplified. We know that words matter. Your job will dictate how you refer to a person in your official documentation, but that doesn't dictate how you interact with them. Trauma informed with compassion and respect should always lead the in-person to person interactions. With that said, there is a reason you use specific words and terminologies when describing evidence. Victims don't know these rules and often document emotion-based information. So how are they currently documenting? Here are some of the different ways in which they are saving their information. Paper-based journals hold no guidance as to what the courts want to see. We'll talk about those criteria shortly, but I also hear people talking about how big their binders are because they're printing off every email and screenshot, plus every correspondence from everyone involved and keeping it all there to bring to court as to what they consider proof. Pictures can be really valuable, but they need to be in context of an incident, and printing them out may not stand up in court if the defense challenges their validity. I hear all the time, just record them to prove it. They don't understand that it's not legal to secretly record another person in an all-party consent state, and in some, it's in fact a felony to do so. Another thing I often hear is that they're saving all their pictures and notes to their phones. Almost every prosecuting attorney mentions how often they have someone in their office that said everything was on their phone and their phone was destroyed. Or they saved it to their cloud account, but their abuser got into the account and deleted everything. Not to mention Google, Apple, Dropbox, none of those companies can prove chain of custody with thousands of employees and contractors working in and on their systems. Apps downloaded from an app store may help guide a person in deciding what to document, but there are a whole host of data ownership and usage questions that come into play. We'll actually be diving into that topic in more detail in a future webinar entitled Documenting Domestic Violence: Considerations when Recommending Tech Tools for Victims. So let's talk about some terms you should know, but also how they apply specifically to technology. Chain of custody means the company holding the information can certify that the data from the time it goes in until the time it goes out has not been accessed, tampered with, edited, or altered at any time. It means the service provider can show how the information came into the system, how it got to the system, and what happened to it when it was in the system until it was called out of the system. This includes any and all company represented people and or third parties who may have access to said systems, what levels of access, and what those levels can do in regards to the data. Authentication means the information that was entered in is a true representation of what is shown and has not been altered to show anything different. It is really important to make sure any technology allowing for images or multimedia also document who took the images, as someone else, say, taking a picture would need to testify as a witness if they were present. If not, it is hearsay as to what transpired during the incident. It's also important to ensure the image or multimedia includes what we call metadata, or the technical information attached to those files showing when and where it was taken and from what device, used what application, and when the file was created and modified. If you can't show all that, the defense may challenge its authenticity and the data may be excluded from testimony. This would be a devastating blow to the victim, having gone through all the trouble of taking pictures to prove what happened and not being allowed to show any of them. Many digital forensic experts are sharing with us now that they are already seeing technology-based evidence challenged in courts. This will become more of the norm in the future. So we've touched on some of the issues they face in how to document and covered some of the important terms that relate to tech. So let's look at the considerations for legal admissibility. So what's the documentation tool's purpose? Is it to crowdsource information for a third party? If so, what are the data sharing ramifications for the victim? Remember that HIPAA, VAWA, VOCA, and FIPSA rules should apply in handling sensitive data around abuse victims, especially where data sharing is involved. Is the technology to report a crime? Will those receiving it know what they are receiving? And will the victims feel comfortable using it rather than just calling the police or a shelter? There has to be some incentive to using a reporting tool, and that the reasoning needs to be very clear. Is the tool to document the details to help the user in a legal setting? If so, do all of the application's policies and procedures stand up to the rigorous standards that are required by the courts? Do they meet the HIPAA, VAWA, VOCA, and FIPSA regulations as well? Defense discovery. This is a big one. Users should know that if their information stored in their application will be used in court, the defense may have a right to discovery. It probably does. Make sure the victim knows and understands what this means. Knowing and understanding are two different things. An absent victim. What happens if the victim dies or is medically incapacitated? Does the application have protocols for releasing the information? What does that look like? And does it meet all those regulations in delivering that information? And then training. Does the company have any training materials to help those recommending it to help a victim, those receiving the information from the user, and training for the courts if used as evidence? So some evidentiary considerations. The first one is relevance. Is the information the victim is documenting relative or relevant to the case? Open-ended or uploading document type information may not collect relevant information because, again, you're making an assumption and relying on the victim to know what to document. Authentication. It's really important to make sure any technology allowing for images or multimedia also document who took the images, as well as metadata for those media files. Hearsay, big one. Having the ability to upload old thoughts after the fact is hearsay, and allowing a victim to upload old information gives them a false sense of accomplishment and hope and does little to build evidence in a case. Make sure the technology is readily available from anywhere and any device to collect the evidence as close to the time and location of the incident as possible. Being able to document details as soon as they are safely able to can be argued to be excited utterance and is an exception to the hearsay rule. And substantive evidence. Evidence offered to support a fact in issue as opposed to corroborating evidence. Often they're given a notebook or asked to use something collecting their free-flowing thoughts, but those can be emotion-driven and not collect the necessary evidence to be considered in a wrongdoing proceeding. Make sure the technology is poised to collect the right evidence. So we're going to dive a little deeper into substantive evidence. It ensures the information is meaningful in court and that it is substantive evidence. I fell down and hit my knees is not enough. I was shoved into the table and both my knees hit the glass table and were cut open by my fall, causing the table to break the glass. Tells a more complete story. Having the geolocated date and timestamp to show where and when it happened supports the account as corroborating. Having pictures showing bloody knees and a broken glass table with blood on the glass is substantive. Having the user access the documentation tool with a validated token to prove it was them entering the information at the time and place entered makes both the evidence and the victim more credible to the courts. So now we're going to go into the victim's voice tool. So what should a documentation tool look like when having to prove long-term gradual control and abuse that is often more emotion-based than physical in its totality? Here are some of the features that we feel are very crucial. A victim-controlled shareable report, legally admissible, HIPAA privacy standards, VAWA, we talked about VOCA and FIPSA standards. Undetectable, meaning that, you think of an icon sitting on your phone, that's detectable. You're alerting someone that there's something there. It's safe to use. You can use it anywhere. Device agnostic, meaning it can be used in any kind of device. That it's private, secure, and permanent, that it can't be deleted. It's got to be easy to use and multi-language so that you're not excluding a huge portion of the population. I would also add here that having something that is ADA compliant is also really, really important. So we touched on, and as many people are familiar with, apps that you download from an app store, but those are device type specific and leave a detectable trail. Mobile responsive websites can be an option, but often lack the design features that take into account accessibility. Page load times can be an issue, and navigation can be tricky. You don't want to have someone having to zoom in and out to find things. Think of someone who's under trauma and duress, their eyes are filled with tears. You want something that's very easy to be able to work through. Another option is what is known as a progressive web app, or a PWA. It's a web-based application, but with special programming that allows it to know what sort of device is accessing it and conform to look and feel and act more like a native app from an app store. This makes it device agnostic, meaning you can use it at any device at all, and it makes it more accessible to those that need it whenever and wherever. It's also safe enough to use in a public computer. You can use it in a school or work device because The victim's voice tool does not save any information to a local device, which means that you can use it from any device without any fear of information being accessed or deleted. So data storage is really, really important as well. Data for a victim's voice is a one-way tool so that the information cannot be altered and the chain of ownership and data integrity can be maintained. It's also done to ensure that when a victim starts to feel like an incident was their fault, they are unable to access it or edit any of the details. I can speak from personal experience that within 30 minutes of an incident happening, I've already justified in my mind why that incident was my fault, and am now fearful of having that information somewhere and want to kind of knee-jerk reaction, delete all the information. And then if that happens down the road, you wish you had saved all that information. So we just prevent that from happening. It also prevents any abusers who may gain knowledge of the user's login credentials from deleting or altering any information. The only way to view the information submitted is by generating a report. The other benefit of the one-way door is that what we don't want is the defense saying, well, they went back and viewed their information and that influenced how they answered questions in the future. So we've eliminated that as well, since they have no immediate visibility on anything outside of generating a report. So we take security very seriously. This includes data and system security, but also the user's security. We work under the assumption that every request we get where users' accounts are concerned may potentially be an abuser trying to gain access to the system and control over the account. Our internal operational procedures are in place to ensure that we don't inadvertently give that control to anyone but the account holder. We also work under the assumption that every user is potentially in a life or death situation and that our procedures don't put them in further harm's way. We also account for the possibility of a worst case scenario where the user is no longer able to speak for themselves and have allowed a way for their voice and evidence to still be heard. That's through the journal designee. The records recipient process is one that limits the time to access the report and has multiple safety features built into the report. So even with human error, such as you leave the saved file on your computer and on your desk and run to the restroom, potentially exposing it to unintended recipients, the report can still not be accessed by anyone outside. In-mail support, this is an added feature where we never communicate with the user outside of the environment of the application itself, so that all communication happens within their account, and it uses their username and password to access their account, but then an additional user-based two-step authentication to ensure any of the sensitive areas aren't breached by anyone or accessed by anyone except for the user themselves. The only exception to communicating outside of the application would, of course, be any kind of data breaches that we would be regulated by federal mandates to report to the user. So guided questions are really key, and a lot of collaborative effort from professionals went into making sure that the questions were the right ones, worded in the right way to easily be understood and not elitist in nature. But even the best guided questions need an explanation in the user's own words. This is why we allow for many places for the victim to describe what happened in their own words, giving us more insight into their emotional state while adding clarity and explanation to the pointed questions. So anytime where you see a select or a multi-select, we'll follow up with an open-ended so that they can describe. So let's talk about the benefits to the victim. It's easy to understand and walk through the questions. captures details that they wouldn't think to capture, able to offload critical evidence that might otherwise be lost or destroyed. This is particularly applicable to images. Once they upload those images into the system with all of that metadata, if it's not safe for those images to be on their device, they can get rid of them off of their device. There's no app to download and no fear of discovery because they're not downloading anything to their device. They don't have to share their identity or circumstances until they're ready to do so and or feel safe. This goes back to the fact that the user has control and makes the decision of if, when, and to whom a report is ever generated. Their personal POA in the event that the records are needed. So that durable power of attorney being in place that allows that POA to be able to assign a records recipient. It does not give access to the account at any time to that journal designee or that durable power of attorney. It only allows them with legal documentation uploaded into our system proving that deceased or medically incapacitated, then they are granted permission to be able to assign a records recipient on behalf of the user. And then permanent storage. Because we are a licensed software, we often get asked the question, well, what if my license lapses? And we are victim-centric in that if they use it for a couple of years and are documenting and then they don't use it for a few years and they come back to their account, all their information is still in the system. We never delete the information at all. We hold it permanently. So some benefits to an advocate and legal teams. This goes back to our original scenario when someone comes in with significant injuries and tells you that they slipped and fell. Your careful documentation in the medical record might not otherwise be discovered if it's not reported as a domestic violence incident. But if they tell a doctor one story and document what really happened in their tool, referencing that they went to the doctor, now you have a link and you may be able to testify as an expert as to what you documented, corroborating their truth. There may be additional charges that can be identified, such as child endangerment, weapons charges, animal cruelty, and more. So these are just some of the categories asked by Victim's Voice, and we are constantly working with professionals to identify other areas to strengthen cases. We have a lot of tribal information on the right-hand side. That's because our new release, which will be coming out very soon, will help navigate tribal jurisdiction and legal compliance in Native American tribal courts as well. We have been working with tribal advocates and tribal judges to make sure that we got all that information correct as well. So I'd like to point out, as a former victim and survivor, that one of the most notable features of Victim's Voice is, again, the user is in control. This is something that they've lost to their abusers. We've given it back to them to ensure they're comfortable with their timelines. They decide if, when, and to whom a report is ever generated. There are a lot of use cases outside of going, using it in a criminal case as well. We have use case scenarios that we've learned of where people have used it to get a final protection order. We've had one individual who documented and used it to recall memories for writing a book. So lots of different use case scenarios. So now let's review and revisit the purpose. Each of us contributes one piece in helping victims of domestic violence and other long-term abuses. Each piece is important, but it needs to be strong and it needs to be right to be effective. So in revisiting the purpose of the documentation tool, you'll recommend take a look at how we measure up to the ones that you've seen in the past. Protection of both the victim and their evidence is paramount in all business decisions we make in developing and distributing our technology. It lends credibility to the victim, for this type of abuse is gradual, long-term, and very hidden. The devil is definitely in the details. And justice. The steps we've taken to gather, store, and report the right information so that it stands up to the strictest legal standards as evidence admitted in court. We never want a survivor to feel re-victimized by the justice process because the information they worked so hard to collect turned out to be all for nothing. Again, I speak from past experience on this one as well. And finally, as you explore additional tools out there, ask yourself, does it meet the legal standards for professionals to better serve victims, or is it just another glorified diary? Thank you. If you would like to do a deeper dive into the more technical and legal aspects, we do have an upcoming CLE program. There's some information right there. And if you'd like to reach out to me, all my contact information and our website and social media is on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. This is Diana, and we've got a question from Elizabeth, and it is, can covert recordings be used for civil cases in both parties consenting in consenting states? Maybe due to the difference between the burden of proof in civil cases versus criminal cases.
Right. So yes, our application is used in all kinds of cases, and not just domestic violence. We also know of cases in stalking and neighborhood property disputes and all kinds of stuff. Recording is a really tricky thing. The audio and video surveillance laws vary so greatly. I tease that we're not the United States of America, we're the 50 discombobulated laws of America. And so what we didn't want to do was put the burden of assumption on a victim that probably doesn't know the laws in their state, may not even know that laws exist around this. So what we tell them is, if you do have a legally obtained audio or video file and you can safely park it somewhere, you can reference that that file exists in the application. There are programs that you can have that transcribed and put the transcription. If there's a video, you can also take timestamped screenshots of that video and put them in the application as images, because we don't limit the number of images that you can upload to your account. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any more questions. Does anyone else have a question? We've got lots of time here.
It's kind of a lot of information that went through really fast.
Yes.
We have had several cases across the US that we know of that have successfully used their reports as evidence in court. And I stress that we know of, because we encrypt the information of our users immediately upon account creation. So we don't even know who our users are. I have a lot of marketing people that tell me, you're crazy. How do you even communicate with these people? How do you market to these people? We don't. We put out a lot of educational information through social media. We don't house their information in any of our systems. The only system where their information is the tool itself. It's very encapsulated, isolated, and very well protected, and it's all encrypted. So even our staff doesn't know who is in our system. So you all could be users in the system. I would never know.
Wow. Jody is asking, what is the cost per use?
So it's an annual cost. We didn't want to do month-to-month billing. That would be too dangerous. So it's an annual cost of $39.95 a year. However, 99% of victims of domestic violence are victims of financial abuse, which pretty much means everyone. So we have a couple alternatives. We have a gifting program. I know that survivors love to want to do something to help victims. So we have a donor program where people can prepay the license, and they can either donate it to a partner in our partner program, or they earmark us as the inventory keeper. And then when victims reach out to us through social media asking for a license, we provide that license and onboarding information with no questions asked, push that out to them, and then whether they activate it or not, that's up to them. Our partner program is where we work with victim serving entities that bulk purchase at reduced rates. These cards that we have, I don't know if you can see me up here, but these are what equates to like a gift card, and it has an activation code hidden on the back. And we work a lot with district attorneys' offices, nonprofits, victim witness advocates, law enforcement agencies. They pre-purchase these activation cards and then give them to their the people in their communities. And I know like Nueces County, which is Corpus Christi, Texas, they actually purchased 200 of those cards and said, whether or not you're in our county, if you need to document, you reach out to us, we'll give you the license. So a lot of agencies that are giving these licenses out. If someone asks us for a license and says, I can't pay and there's no partner in my area, we have licenses now that we're able to give out.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So everyone, all the attendees, you have been unmuted, so you can directly ask Sherry a question. And then Sherry, one other question for me. I know you talked about your background as being a domestic violence survivor. Can you share any more about your background, your professional background?
Yeah, so I've worked largely in sales and marketing analytics. I worked in several different industries, but I worked for a long time in technology, but enterprise technology. And actually kind of a background story to how Victim's Voice even came to be. In 2016, I was a consultant. I was building CRM systems, marketing automation for a lot of nonprofits and small businesses. And my daughter built an anti-bullying mobile app for her science fair project. She was 10. And it was called the Zebra app. It stood for Zoe Ending Barriers in Reporting Adversity. And we were invited to speak at a developers conference out in California. And while the Q&A was happening on stage, people were saying, well, what if you used it for this? And what about this case scenario? That was really when my two worlds collided, when my survivor life and my professional technology life really just ran into each other. And it dawned on me that you could solve really serious social impact issues with the right technology, the right being operative here. So my daughter on the plane ride home from California back to the East Coast said to me, being an introvert, I don't want anything more to do with this app. You can do whatever you want, just you can't use my name. So that's where our corporate name, ABINRA, comes from. And it stands for Ending Barriers in Reporting Adversity. So that was when it came to me that domestic violence there's a lot of apps out there, but most of them focus on sexual assault, which there are some similarities, but a large amount of differences as well. And domestic violence is largely overlooked when it comes to technology. It's really a difficult space to tackle because it is so long-term and it is so gradual and it is so private. So I decided that if nobody else was going to do it, I was going to do it. So I built a prototype, and for 2.5 years, went around to every professional that I could find, asking them, give me your feedback, tell me what I'm doing wrong, tell me someone else has already done this. People would see me coming and start running, I think. But when we felt we got it, when we felt we got it right, then we decided that we would move forward.
All right, a couple more questions have come in, and this is from Sarita. We talked about what is the cost. How does she find this app? And
So
do
the
you have any, whoops, sorry. How does she find this? And do you have any information that you could provide to us to provide to survivors?
Yeah, so in the chat here, I'm going to put a URL. All I ask is that you don't post this on social, because we don't like abusers having access to the same information. There is a 3-minute, 37-second video that's an overview that explains a lot of what I talked about today, but more in depth around the application and how it works. So that's a great resource if you need to grab that. Victimsvoice.app is our website. There's information about the partner programs on there. There's resources available. If you want to be listed as a resource, there's no fee to be listed as a resource. We want to encourage everyone that has an agency or some sort of organization to be listed. It's pretty much just a business directory so that when victims do find us, they can also find what resources are out there to help them. We know our lane and we're a tool. We are not the resource. You guys are the resource. Oh, I will thank Zoe. Thank you. So it's really important that we point people in the right direction where they can get the help that they need.
Great. And then if you could put your website link in too, just in case they want to dig around on it.
Yeah.
And then while we're doing that, I know before everyone came into the room, you were talking that you were going international, and we do have 2 people on international, one from Switzerland and one from Iran.
Okay, excellent. Well, we are, how we're moving into other countries, and I cannot type and talk at the same time. So I'm going to finish this right here. Okay, our corporate site is there. How we're moving into other countries is we are white labeling our back end and our front end, and customizing it for organizations or entrepreneurs that are as passionate as we are, but understand the cultural nuances in their own country and the legal hurdles that they're going to, and data privacy hurdles that they're going to have to overcome. We are working for our GDPR certification now, because moving into Europe, we have to have that in place. And that's kind of the gold standard worldwide. So once we have that certification in place, other countries can know that, you know, what we have meets their criteria. So if you are in another country or know someone in another country that is interested and as passionate as I am about giving victims a legal voice, we are looking for those partnerships to be able to provide the back end, the security, the privacy, the data storage, all that, and allow them to focus on the business and the nuances of their own country's specifics.
Okay. So everybody, it's about 1:45. We'll wait just a couple more minutes. If anybody has any other questions, now is the time.
We are running a program. We just recently partnered with an organization called the Halo app. They are a peer lending alternative to payday loans. And we formed a partnership that we call the Victims Voice Halo Fund. And so right now, anyone who donates a license at $40, $30 will go towards the license for a victim that needs one. And $10 of that will be earmarked to a fund that will, when we meet the $1,000 threshold, we'll be able to provide up to $1,000 cash loans with up to 6 months to repay for any victim that needs it for any reason to feel safe. We are not pre-qualifying those requests. There will be a button in the Halo app that they will click on that to denote that that's the reason that they need it. The money will be wired into their account. The Halo app normally takes a 10% fee. They'll take an 8% and the other 2% they'll put back into our fund. And all the money paid back from that loan will go back into the fund. So that fund will continually grow. And over time, we'll be able to provide more and more victims with the cash that they need to get out and be safe.
Wow, great.
Yeah.
So Sherry, I have one more question from Sarita. So
Okay.
if the victim has done a journal, is there any way that that can be transformed into usable evidence?
I would say if they have a journal, reference that they have the journal in the application. They can take pictures of all the pages and upload them if they fear that the journal will be destroyed. But just loading the information into the app, then because it's historical, falls into the hearsay, because they're pulling past information into something and it doesn't meet that uttered excitement statement, which is a hearsay exception. So yes, they can. It would be a lot of work for them to do it, but they're absolutely can do it. And I would recommend doing it as pictures and referencing that they do have this diary. I would also recommend to them that if it's not safe for them to keep that diary where they are, take it to work if they can. If they're not, because of COVID, they can't go to work, mail it to a trusted friend or family member. Put it somewhere where it's out of the immediate area of being discovered and destroyed. That would be my recommendation. Journals get destroyed. I know. I had a journal that was discovered and I got beat for it and it was destroyed and I lost everything. So I know how tedious it is to have those. Yeah.
All right, I don't see any more questions. So just a couple things, everyone, before we close. I just wanted to let you know that in December, which we're in now, December, if you can believe that, we've got a couple more webinars coming up. Next week is Adult Adolescent Sexual Assault Medical Exams by Dr. Kelly Smith. And then the following week, we'll have our pediatric case review. And then in January, this is really exciting. We have a death investigation boot camp. So for those of you that are interested in expanding into death investigation, this is a great first step. In May, we have our virtual AFN conference. And then in July, we're back in Indiana with testifying for the forensic nurse. All right. Nothing else.
Thank you so much.
No,
Thank you so much for having me.
Pardon?
There's one more question.
Oh, okay. Let me pull it up here.
Do you have cards to give out?
We do. We have about, I think we have 3,000 cards in inventory right now ready to be shipped. So if you are looking to become a partner in our partner program, we do, like I said, have that bulk rate, reduced rate purchase. So feel free to email me. My email's at the bottom of the screen. That's my email. It comes directly to me. And yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And we'll go ahead and turn the recording off.